The Songhai Empire was a state that dominated the western Sahel in the 15th and 16th centuries. Now, the Sahel is the part that borders where the forest grassland begins in Africa and where the desert begins. So there's this thin strip of land between the two, between the desert and the grassland. That strip of land between the desert and the grass is the Sahel. At its peak, Songhai was one of the largest states in African history. The state is known by its historiographical name, derived from its leading ethnic group and ruling elite, the Songhai. Soni Ali established Gao as the capital of the empire, although a Songhai state had existed in and around Gao since the 11th century. Other important cities in the empire were Timbuktu and Diane, conquered in 1468 and 1475, respectively, where urban centered trade flourished. So in Timbuktu, it was an urban center where trade flourished. Initially, the empire was ruled by the Soni dynasty from 1464 to 1493 AD, but it was later replaced by the Askia dynasty that went till 1591. During the second half of the 13th century, Gao and the surrounding region had grown into an important trading center and attracted the interest of the expanding Mali Empire. Mali conquered Gao toward the end of the 13th century, and the town would remain under Malayan hegemony until the late 14th century. But as the Mali Empire started to disintegrate, the Songhai reasserted control of Gao. Songhai rulers subsequently took advantage of the weakened Mali Empire to expand Songhai rule itself. So this is how big it got, right here. And it's very large. It's larger than Western Europe. So this one empire is the size of Europe, essentially. It's in West Africa. Here's the Sahel zone, where the desert's to the north and the grass to the south. In the second half of the 14th century, disputes over succession weakened the Mali Empire, and in the 1430s, Songhai, previously a Mali dependency, gained independence under the Soni dynasty. Around 30 years later, Soni Suleiman Dama attacked Mema in Mali, the Mali province west of Timbuktu, paving the way for his successor, Soni Ali, to turn his country into one of the greatest empires in sub-Saharan Africa. Soni Ali reigned from 1464 to 1492. Like Songhai kings before him, he was a Muslim. In the late 1460s, he conquered many of the Songhai's neighboring states, including what remained of the Mali Empire. He was arguably the empire's most formidable military strategist and conqueror. Under his rule, Songhai reached a size of over 1,400,000 square kilometers. During his campaigns for expansion, Soni Ali conquered many lands, repelling attacks from the Mossi to the south and overcoming the Dogon people to the north. He annexed Timbuktu in 1468 after Islamic leaders of the town requested his assistance in overthrowing marauding Tuaregs, which are Berber people with a traditionally nomadic pastoral lifestyle, who had taken the city following the decline of the Mali Empire. However, Ali met stark resistance after setting his sights on the wealthy and renowned trading town. After a persistent 7-year siege, he was able to forcibly incorporate it into his vast empire in 1473, but only after having starved its citizens to surrender. Oral traditions present a conflicted image of Soni Ali. On the one hand, the invasion of Timbuktu destroyed the city. Ali was described as an intolerant tyrant who conducted a repressive policy against the scholars of Timbuktu. especially those of the Senghore region, who were associated with the Tuareg, those he had been fighting. On the other hand, his control of critical trade routes and cities brought great wealth. He is thus often presented as a powerful politician and great military commander, and under his reign, Timbuktu became a great center of learning. You could see there's Gao, or the heart of the Songhai Empire, and there's Timbuktu, the intellectual heart and trade center of the empire. Following Ali's reign, Askia the Great strengthened the Songhai Empire and made it the largest empire in West Africa's history. At its peak under his reign, the Songhai Empire encompassed the Hausa states as far as Kano, present day Nigeria, and much of the territory that had belonged to the Songhai Empire in the west. His policies resulted in a rapid expansion of trade with Europe and Asia, the creation of many schools, and the establishment of Islam as an integral part of the empire. Askia opened religious schools, constructed mosques, and opened up his court to scholars and poets from throughout the Muslim world. But he was also tolerant of other religions and did not force Islam on his people. Among his great accomplishments was an interest in astronomical knowledge, which led to the development of astronomy and observatories in the capital. Not only was he a patron of Islam, but he was also gifted in administration and encouraging trade. He centralized the administration of the empire and established an effective bureaucracy that was responsible for, among other things, tax collection and administration of justice in the courts. He was also demanded that canals be built in order to enhance agriculture, which would eventually increase trade. More importantly than anything he did for trade was the introduction of weights and measures and the appointment of an inspector for each of Songhai's important trading centers. During his reign, Islam became more widely entrenched, trans Saharan trade flourished, and the Saharan salt mines at Tagaza were brought within the boundaries of the empire. However, as Askia the Great grew older, his power declined. In 1528, his sons revolted against him and declared Musa, one of Askia's many sons, as king. Following Musa's overthrow in 1531, Songhai's empire went into decline. Multiple attempts at governing the empire by Askia's sons and grandsons failed, and between the political chaos and multiple civil wars within the empire, Morocco invaded Songhai. The main reason for Moroccan invasion of Songhai was to take control and revive the Sahara trade routes in salt and gold. The Songhai military during Askia's reign consisted of full-time soldiers, but the king never modernized the army. The empire fell to the Moroccans and their firearms in 1591. At its peak, the Songhai city of Timbuktu became a thriving cultural and commercial center where Arab, Italian, and Jewish merchants all gathered for trade. Economic trade existed throughout the empire due to the standing army stationed in the provinces. Central to the regional economy were independent gold fields. The merchants would form partnerships, and the state would protect these merchants in the port cities. The Songhai economy was based on a clan system. The clan a person belonged to ultimately decided your job. The most common were metal workers, fishermen, and carpenters. Lower caste participants consisted of mostly non farm working immigrants, who at times were provided special privileges and held high positions in society. At the top were noblemen and direct descendants of the original Songhai people, followed by freemen and traders. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were war captives and European slaves obligated to labor, especially in farming. Historian James Olson describes the labor system as resembling modern day unions, with the empire possessing craft guilds that consisted of various mechanics and artisans. Criminal justice in Songhai was based mainly, if not entirely, on Islamic principles. Eventually, especially during the rule of Askia the Great, upper classes in society converted to Islam, while lower classes often continued to follow traditional religions. Sermons emphasized obedience to the king. Soni Ali established a system of government under the royal court, later to be expanded by Askia, which appointed governors and mayors to preside over local tributary states situated around the Niger Valley. Local chiefs were still granted authority over their respective domains, as long as they did not undermine Songhai policy. Tax was imposed onto peripheral chiefdoms and provinces to ensure the dominance of Songhai, and in return, these provinces were given almost complete autonomy. Songhai rulers only intervened in the affairs of these neighboring states when a situation became volatile, usually an isolated incident. Each town was represented by government officials, holding positions and responsibilities similar to today's central bureaucrats. So, what do you think? Name some accomplishments of Soni Ali. Why is Timbuktu important? And name some accomplishments of Askia the Great.